Ever get that feeling like, boom, huge news drops, everyone's all riled up, but you just know deep down there's more to it, like way more. That's kind of the vibe we're going for in this deep dive. We're really going to dissect this book, The Machiavellians, by James Burnham. It's about power, like the nuts and bolts, no sugarcoating. Get ready, it's about to get real.
What blows me away about the Machiavellians is it was written way back in 43, but it's scary how much it applies now, even today.
So almost 100 years later, and it's like he had a crystal ball or something.
Burnham, he was this, get this, former Trotskyist, right? And then he becomes this total political realist.
Okay, that's a heck of a journey.
Totally. Burnham's whole thing was like, forget the labels, man, forget left, right, all that. He wanted to expose the real game, the power dynamics that never change.
So it's like he's saying, forget the theater, let's talk about who's really running the show.
Exactly. And he uses this phrase, calls them the Machiavellians. And of course, he starts with the OG Machiavellian himself, Niccolo Machiavelli.
Ugh, Machiavelli, the prince guy. It's better to be feared than loved.
That's the one. Although, to be fair to Machiavelli, he wasn't saying go be a jerk. More like he's just trying to figure out what actually works, when you're in charge. His point was rulers who get all hung up on being nice guys, all about that morality, they usually don't last long.
Interesting. So it's less about being a villain and more about being, well, realistic. You got to do what you got to do.
Exactly. And that's where these other Machiavellians come in, the ones Burnham talks about. They each have their own piece of this puzzle, this whole understanding of how power actually works.
Okay, I'm hooked. Give me the rundown. Who are these power players?
All right, so there's this guy, Gaetano Mosca. He was an Italian sociologist, and he had this theory, elite theory. Basically, he said every society, no matter how much they talk about democracy and all that, it's always run by a small group at the top.
So even if we think it's all power to the people, there's still a group calling the shots behind the scenes.
That's Mosca's point. And then you've got Vilfredo Pareto, another Italian guy, oddly enough, and he adds this whole other layer to it. He calls it the circulation of elites. He's saying, yeah, the people in power, they might change, but the fact that there's an elite group, that never goes away. Think of it like musical chairs, The players change, but the game is still the same.
So it's not about one group staying on top forever. It's that there's always a top, and new people are always trying to claw their way up there.
Right. Think about political dynasties, right? They rise, they fall, new ones come along. Or how about these tech giants? They disrupt everything, but it's still a small group holding all the cards. And then Burnham introduces us to Robert Michels, who drops this bomb he calls the iron law of oligarchy.
An iron law. Sounds kind of ominous. What's Michels' the deal?
So Michels, he was all about these organizations, like political parties, labor unions. Even if they start all about power to the people, they end up run by a small group.
Like even with good intentions, it just kind of drifts that way.
Yeah, he called it the iron law of oligarchy. As things get big and complicated, you got to centralize, someone's got to be in charge. It's not always that they're being evil, it's just how it goes,
Okay, so even if you try to make things equal, it's like this magnet pulling power to the top. So is Burnham saying democracy is doomed? Like, what's the point of even trying?
And Burnham, he's not giving us easy answers here. He's all about facing reality, even if it's not pretty.
So if we assume these elites are always going to be around, then what? Just give up. I mean, does he offer any hope for making things more fair?
He does, but it's not about getting rid of elites altogether. Remember, Burnham's a pragmatist. He's saying, look, instead of wishing they'd go away, let's figure out how to work within this system. And a big part of that, he says, is understanding these things. Sorel called myths. Another one of Burnham's Machiavellians, by the way.
Yeah, it's like stories we tell ourselves.
Exactly. Sorel said these myths, whatever you call them, narratives, ideologies, even just like good marketing, they're super powerful for anyone in charge. Makes things simple, gets people on your side, even turns folks against the other guy.
Hold on, so are we just talking about propaganda here? Is Burnham saying we're all getting played?
That might be a little extreme, but it's not totally wrong either. He's saying, wake up. Pay attention to the stories you're being told. Who's doing the telling? What do they get out of it?
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. It's like not believing everything you hear, being more skeptical.
Right, don't just take things at face value. And here's where Sorel's ideas connect to Burnham's whole elite thing. He's saying, whoever controls those stories, they often control everything else.
So it's not just politics, it's everything. The news, what we learn, even those stories about like what it means to be successful.
Exactly. Think about it. The messages we get about the good life, who our enemies are, it all plays into someone's hands, even if they don't mean it to.
It's kind of freaky when you start noticing it.
For sure. But it also kind of puts you back in the driver's seat, Once you see the game, you can play it smarter.
So we got to learn the rules, even if they're rigged, so we can at least try to win.
And that's where it gets even more interesting, because Burnham then goes on to talk about how all this works in a democracy. Because remember, he's not against democracy. He just wants to make it actually work.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Burnham says elites, they're always going to be around no matter what kind of system you got. And we talked about how they use these narratives, these stories, to keep their power. But where do we go from here? If we can't get rid of elites, what's the best way to make sure nobody takes over completely, to protect freedom and all that?
So this is where Burnham's argument gets kind of wild. He says the best defense against tyranny isn't actually getting rid of elites. It's making sure there's enough competition between them.
Wait, so instead of trying to create the system without elites, which he says is impossible anyway, we should just focus on making sure there are lots of different groups vying for power.
Exactly. Burnham's argument is that when power's spread out, when you got all these different groups fighting for control, no one group can grab it all.
So it's like a free market, but for power.
Right. Competition, that's the key.
So we should be thanking these power-hungry elites for keeping each other in check. That's a tough pill to swallow. But I see the logic, I guess. As long as they're competing, no one group can become, like, all-powerful. But how do we make sure this whole competition thing actually benefits, the rest of us?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And Burnham's answer is that this competition, it forces the elites to appeal to the masses, at least a little bit. To stay on top, we got to offer something, right? Maybe it's better jobs or a chance to move up in the world, or even just this illusion that we have a choice. And that's where you get a little wiggle room for freedom, for people to actually have some say in things.
So it's like it's in their own self-interest to at least act like they care about what we want?
Pretty much. And that can create these openings, Even if the elites have a lot of power, there's still ways for people to influence things, to make their voices heard.
So it's not about tearing the whole system down. It's about figuring out how to play the game even if we don't like the rules. That's pretty Machiavellian when you think about it.
It is, right. But here's the thing. Burnham's not saying we should just be cynical, like we're all helpless. He wants to give people a more realistic view of how this stuff really works so they can actually do something about it.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? If we accept what Burnham's saying, that elites are a fact of life, what's the best way to make sure they don't abuse that power, that they actually protect our freedoms?
To me, the biggest takeaway is to be, really critically engaged. Don't just accept everything you hear. Think about who's telling you these things, what they get out of it, and most importantly, get involved. Find groups, organizations, people who are trying to challenge the system to make things more fair. Support them, work with them, make your voice heard.
That's a good point. It's easy to feel powerless when you think about all this stuff, these giant forces controlling everything. But Burnham's saying, hey, we're not off the hook. We got to stay informed. We got to get involved, and we got to hold those in power accountable.
Absolutely. The more we understand about all this, the better we can navigate this crazy world and maybe, just maybe, make it a little better.
This deep dive into the Machiavellians, it's been a trip, honestly. Really made me rethink some things about power, about democracy, all of it.
It's one of those books that really sticks with you,
For our listeners, if you're ready to really go deep on this stuff, definitely check out the Machiavellians. And as always, we want to hear from you. What do you think about Burnham's ideas? Do you agree with them? Hit us up on social media. Use the hashtag #DeepDiveMachiavellians. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.